Welcome back to Why Blank Lost. I'm David Bloomberg. What's that song you're singing?
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
You were just humming this song.
Oh, I was just thinking. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think that tune goes really nice with three special words that you have to tell me, Jessica.
Oh, Lord, this is where we're starting. Really?
Yeah.
We're gonna have to go with David. You're right. Okay, there you are.
You can hum it. David, you're right. David, you're right. David, you're right. David,
we can change the shantham to the
David thum.
The David thum. I was like Bloomberg.
Yeah.
All right, so now you have your own song. David, you're right. David, you're right. Congratulations. You were right. You were right.
Yeah. Yes.
You watched the preview. You read the logic. We saw the TikTok. You put it out into the universe. You were right.
Yes. And that is, like Jessica said, the prediction I made at the end of our last podcast was that Shan would be the one voted out. Counted the votes, followed the logic, determined it made sense. Of course, just because I saw the logic didn't mean the players would see the logic or that things would go as planned. You even brought up at the time, could everybody keep their lips sealed? And as it turned out, yeah, they could, which is somewhat miraculous.
Which they didn't, though. And I know we're going to get there, but there was a whole lot of people telling on other people, except when we got towards the end, which is amazing. But yeah, we'll get there.
Yes. And so it happened. And now we get to spend some time talking about why.
We do.
Now, of course, our conversation about this vote will be guided by comparing Shan's game to the rules for winning that I originally wrote way back after season 1. I've been updating ever since. We will look at all the non-spoiler information available to us from what we saw on TV, social media, and more. To see the most recent version of the rules, go to our dedicated page at robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. Unfortunately, this week, due to the Thanksgiving holiday, we're not able to wait for Shan's interviews or even Ponderosa. I thought maybe they'd put Ponderosa up. Given how much we've seen of her game, I feel like there probably won't be any huge revelations in interviews that change what we're going to say. But if anything massive comes out, we'll address them next week.
Or you'll make a TikTok about it.
Or both.
They have to have options.
That's right. We remain flexible.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing, by the way, you didn't notice maybe is I'm wearing a shirt that I wore a few weeks ago, but it says I may be wrong, but it's highly unlikely, and I just had to wear that again this time.
Yes, because you were right this time. But you've been wrong so many other times.
No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about David, you're right. David, you're right.
We're just focusing on that today. That's
exactly.
Okay. All right.
Just remember the hits, forget the misses.
All right. That's what I'll do then.
Okay. All right. Now, before we get to the rules, as usual, we have some things to talk about from the episode. The first topic I want to bring up is the series of emotional discussions we saw this week.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of difficult topics for several players to deal with. And I'd like to quote Dalton Ross's tweet where he said, "That fascinating scene between Shan and Sean is not, quote, woke Survivor. It's classic Survivor.
Yes.
People wrestling with their conscience while also trying to win $1 million is the entire basis of the game. Scenes like that have always been the lifeblood of the show." And he's absolutely right. From the first season, people have struggled in their decision-making between doing what's quote unquote right and doing what's in the best interest of their own game.
Oh, absolutely. This entire episode felt different, and I loved that because it felt like Survivor.
Yes.
I didn't feel like I was watching a game show. The editing was beautiful. I just want to throw that in there too. Some of those conversations that were being had, especially the one with Ricard and Shan by the fire, just gorgeous editing and really allowing the viewers to appreciate not just the beauty of the show, but the conversations happening throughout the show. And there were so many of those that just made it brought Survivor back to where it used to be. And I really do love that. And I love that Dalton Ross pointed that out in his article, because that is something we have seen since season 1 of Survivor, where people are having those inner struggles where you're trying to make the best determination for yourself. Like, I want to win $1 million, but I might not necessarily agree with this person's lifestyle, but I want to play with that person. Or I might not necessarily appreciate this person because of what they did to me on the island, but I still want to win $1 million and I have to play with them. And these are conversations that we've seen throughout history with Survivor. And so to bring it back to that and to remove some of those extra elements like advantages and all of these extra things that have been inundating the seasons lately, I really appreciated just experiencing that again. It was lovely to watch.
Yeah, and to go back to quoting Dalton Ross again, he also tweeted, "No idle hunts, no rando advantages or hourglasses. Tons of fascinating one-on-one scenes as players struggle to reconcile their desire to win with competing personal factors. Easily the best Survivor episode of the season." I got to tell you, I don't understand why it's so hard for Jeff Probst to see how episodes like this are perfect and we don't need or want all the other BS.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as someone who's actually played the game, these are conversations you have with yourself on the daily, because you are creating relationships with people, you're becoming close with people, and you don't want to end up having to vote that person out, or you don't want to have to go to the end with that person for whatever reason. And every player, I can guarantee, has had these conversations with themselves when they're on the island, and is likely having conversations with other people on the island about it as well. But I do think that we've passed into an interesting place, because I don't think that we've ever really seen survivors so willing to share with each other how they're struggling with it. They might be willing to share with someone else that they're struggling with playing with that person over there, or I don't want to bring that person to the end because they're going to beat me. But I feel like this is one of those first conversations that we've really seen where two survivors were like, hey, I can't beat you, you can't beat me, or we can't beat each other. One of us is going to have to take each other out. We might have gotten a little close with other duos that we've seen. And I do think like Tony and Sarah, like that was a beautiful relationship we saw develop. Dom and Wendell, where they were having really deep conversations. But I think this one took it a little bit further, where they were both acknowledging, I'm going to vote you out. It's going to happen. Who's going to go first? Like who's going to do it first was really an incredible thing to see.
Yeah, and of course you're talking about Shan and Ricard, and the reason I'm clarifying is because there were multiples, right? There were multiple different of those conversations, the one-on-ones. I mean, these were two people who became close friends. They were, seemingly completely honest with one another while recognizing they were also opponents. Because Ricard said Shan was the type of player who wins Survivor. Shan showed her knowledge of the game and the unfortunate situation we found ourselves in by noting that a man almost always beats a woman at the end. Ricard countered that, well, that could change in season 41. And I think both of them were absolutely correct in their individual viewpoints. And I'm sure we'll discuss more about Ricard's thoughts when we get to the sixth rule. From Shan's perspective, the last thing she would want would be to go against the one person who had been through literally everything she had and could lay claim to some of the moves that had been made. But the second to last thing that she wanted was to vote out her friend at this stage.
Right. But I think it's great that's being acknowledged, that, and this is something that we've talked about over and over again with duos, is who gets the credit for what the duo does. And we've seen it in years where the person that wins isn't necessarily the person who should win, because they're the person the jury is just less angry with or less upset with.
Or the only one of the duo that's left.
Well, right. But I'm talking about those situations where they're both sitting there and somebody has to get credit when they're both making the moves together and they've been through the game since the beginning, through its entirety, making decisions. That becomes a real struggle when they're sitting in front of a jury, because they have to differentiate themselves from the person they're sitting next to, who they played the entire game with. And we have seen this time and time again where one half, who should probably win because they played a better game, doesn't win because they didn't upset people on the jury. And again,
Right.
this is another resonating theme that we've seen quite a bit. So I do think that, this is going to bring it back around to something that Shan talked a lot about, and that's relationships and how it's significant, those types of relationships you make, because it affects your game so greatly. And I think we've seen that in Survivor when you do have a duo that gets to the end together. And here we didn't see it because they were going to take each other out before they even got there.
Right, which they understood. You don't
Mhm.
want to risk that. Like,
Right.
who's going to be the one, And especially, I would we're gonna this is jumping ahead, but I would say especially, I know,
Was that my fault or
especially
yours?
nobody's, especially Ricard. It's interesting because in the pre-merge, lots of people from UA were saying, we didn't like Ricard, we really loved Shan. If
Right.
that carried through, then yes, especially Ricard would want to get rid of Shan. But
Right.
now, before we go any further into some of the other discussions, I do want to remind listeners about how we handle non-game related factors in terms of analyzing gameplay. Now, I specifically laid out in the introduction to the rules that this is about winning the game. And the
Mhm.
rules, of course, can lead good players to that end goal. I quoted Harry, a super fan from Australian Survivor, who said people should play to win. And that's exactly the struggle that several people were dealing with this week.
Mhm.
Everyone in the core alliance, Shan, Deshawn, Liana, Ricard, Danny, they were all thinking about this in at least some way.
Mhm.
Deshawn and Shan were struggling with it for days now as they kept bumping heads with each other while also wanting to go to the Final Four together. Ricard and Shan had what we just saw, the opposite challenge, as they had become such close friends while also believing neither could take the other to the end. And Liana flat out said, yeah, I know I can hurt my game by being too loyal to Shan, but I'm willing to do it anyway.
Mhm.
All of them had very good reasons for this inner battle, and it was both important and heart-wrenching to see that. But Liana even said at one point that it was beyond the game to her, and that was because it was what mattered to her, and she was comfortable with that decision. When we do this podcast, when we get to the rules here in a little bit, we take that out of the equation just by the nature of how we do things. So I want to make sure that all of that is laid out up front, for listeners.
Yeah, because emotion is obviously a component of everyone's game when they play it.
Right.
But we have said time and time again, the whole goal is to win Survivor. And I understand that a lot of people might go on the show for various reasons. Maybe they're hoping to further a career. Maybe they just want to put themselves out into the world. Maybe they have a message they want to send, whatever it might be. But your ultimate goal should be to win the game. And you can form relationships along the way, and you can form great friendships. You can also hurt some people along the way. And that's something, that's another component of this game, is that in the end, it is a game for $1 million. And so in order to get there, things are going to happen that wouldn't normally happen in everyday life. And you wouldn't, and these types of discussions or these types of relationships or these types of issues, how many times do you have in your everyday life a moment where you're deciding whether or not someone is going to walk away with $1 million?
Right.
So it's like, it's
Happens
a whole
to me all
different
the time.
level. Right. It's a whole different level. And so that should be the ultimate goal. And I feel that everyone who goes on to this show should be cognizant of that is the end goal for anyone here. But I will form relationships along the way. I might hurt people along the way. But in the end, it's a game for $1 million.
Right. Now, some people get there, and I do think that this happened on Big Brother this season, and I think it may have, it happened somewhat here. You get there, you see things are different than you expected. Your goals change.
Yes.
You say, well, yes, I want to win, but if I can't, I want to make sure a fellow Black player wins, or, whatever else, we're talking about that in this specific situation. And sometimes those are opposing goals.
Yes.
And that was something that happened on Big Brother, where there were players who said, well, if I really wanted to play for myself, this would be the move I made. But if I want to play for my larger goal, then this is the move I would make. And that's a huge balance. Now, there have obviously been a lot of comparisons between the Core Alliance on Survivor 41 and the Cookout on Big Brother. Now, one very key difference is that the Cookout managed to keep themselves completely hidden and insulated through their
Mm-hmm.
master plan. Here on Survivor 41, the core alliance was pretty out in the open. And
Right.
certainly Ricard knew about it and knew about his place as Shan's side ally.
Yes.
And that allowed him to make an effort to stop it, which nobody on Big Brother ever had that opportunity.
Right. And that's why we get back to the numbers. And we talked about this last week, where you start looking at the people that are considered on the bottom. And you have to pay attention to those people, because if you continue to vote them out, if you are someone who is outside of that core alliance, you are voting out your ability to flip the game, because that's another number that you might need in order to take someone out of the core alliance. So you always need to be very aware of your place. And Ricard certainly was very aware of his place. He was on the outside of that core alliance looking in and realizing, this is not going to work for me. And I do think that Shan's honesty with him also added to that, where he knew for sure, I'm going to be on the outs. And once we get down in numbers, there is no chance I'm going to be able to flip the game, because that solid 4 is going to then run the game. Yep. And so he was so aware of everyone's place. I'm very impressed with his ability to manage all of that information and still continue to play the game and play it at the pace that he's playing, because he made a very big move sooner than I think most people would have been willing to do it, because he saw like kind of the writing on the wall. Like, this is where it's going to go if I don't do it now, because I'm going to lose the numbers. So very impressive gameplay on Ricard's, in Ricard's, just ability to kind of follow along and understand where things were going to be happening, and to do it so soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I want to kind of go back to some of the emotional discussions, one in particular, again, between Shan and Liana. I referenced it a couple minutes ago with, Liana saying there has been nothing more precious in the game than the two of them on the summit, connecting over their moms and their blackness and their womanhood. And, so she said, I love you, Shan. And even if that means it's idiotic of me to sit next to you in the end, I really don't care. That's how important all of this was to her. And she was willing to give up her game if it came down to it.
Right. And again, that is a personal decision that everybody needs to make when they play this game. You need to look at where you're at and what becomes significant to you. And if you are someone who is going to win at all costs, then that's the game you're going to play. But if you're someone who is more interested in a relationship, then you're going to play a different game. And we've seen very similar decisions being made going back to season 2 with Tina and Colby. Colby had an opportunity to take Keith final 2, who he would have beat hands down all day long, but he had such a close relationship with Tina that became more important to him than winning $1 million. And he was willing to take that risk. And she ultimately ended up winning by 1 vote. And so I do think that that is a conversation that when you play this game, you have to have with yourself. Like, what are you willing to put out into the universe, and what are you willing to walk away with? And if the relationship is more important than the money, well, then that's entirely up to you. But that is a decision that you are making. And I do think that we saw so many really incredible players struggling with that throughout this entire episode, because there are so many that are having that battle that they want to win, but at what cost are they willing to win? And I do think that that was the resonating theme throughout.
Right. And now, the thing is, you make that decision. It's your personal decision. Just know we're going to criticize you for it.
Oh, for sure.
When it comes to winning.
You made the wrong choice.
Yeah,
so many seasons later.
Colby, we gave him, I used to, one of the websites I used to run was the Reality TV Hall of Shame. And we gave Colby a Reality TV Hall of Shame moment, for making that decision. Because based on game, that was the absolute wrong decision.
Right.
Based on game, I suspect when Liana loses, and here's a spoiler for the predictions, I don't think she's going to win. We will be talking about this again. That she made some emotional decisions.
Right.
And so, it's part of the way we analyze the game, even if there may be very, very good reasons to Liana.
Oh, for sure.
When it comes to the game, we just have to do it.
Right.
Now, I hate to go from that emotional moment to one that kind of made me laugh, but on the same topic, one reason Liana told us that she was considering going along with the planned Ricard blindside before she told Shan was to differentiate herself from Shan and show that she wasn't just going along with the ringleader.
Right.
Which meant that she was going to prove she wasn't a follower by following Danny and Deshawn.
Yeah.
I had to laugh at that.
Yeah. There was a lot of things happening. Well, and I do think even like seeing what's coming up next week and her reaction to Danny and Deshawn, I think is also something that we'll be spending some time with when we see how that all ends up.
Right. Now, another topic I wanted to bring up was the somewhat disjointed way the show presented the Shan plan coming together. Ricard talked to Erica and Heather, saying he also had Xander, so they just needed one more person. Then we saw him talk to Deshawn, who also seemed on board. Next, we saw Deshawn discussing it with Danny, who also seemed like he'd go with it. Okay, all that was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then they brought in Erica and Heather talking to Danny, which was weird because it looked like they were convincing him to vote Shan, but we had already seen Deshawn convince him to vote Shan. And then Danny also seemed surprised that they had Ricard, even though it was Ricard's idea, and Ricard had told Deshawn, who told Danny. Now, I don't know if we saw things out of order or something wasn't passed along. I mean, maybe Danny was pretending not to know in order to keep some secrets. And on the Purple Pants podcast, Bryce Isaiah gave props to Danny for acting. So maybe that's it.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I just would have liked to hear from Danny. I would have liked a confessional from Danny being like, they think they convinced me, but I already do. You know,
because
so that we could give him credit.
Right. And because I do think that one thing Danny is doing very well is maintaining the relationships with the close individuals he has those relationships with, and not kind of putting it out into the universe the way that we've been seeing. Like Shan was it was very obvious kind of who Shan is with. Danny and Deshawn are much closer than I think is kind of being put out there. They seem to be sharing a lot of information. So if that's what Danny did, props to him for kind of maintaining that like ignorance, like, oh, this is what we're doing. Well, I can consider this. I can think about it. When he's already had that conversation, it puts him in a much better situation because Heather and Erica can feel like they've created something, that they've done something, when in actuality they haven't. So it kind of throws things off a little bit, like who gets credit for this? Because if Danny goes to the end, he can always say, well, look, I already knew about that. Like you thought that you were one step ahead of me, but I was already there. I'd already made that decision. So I do think that it would be very interesting if that's what he was doing. And I hope that's what he was doing, because it did kind of seem a little off. Although I think that was the first conversation talking about splitting the vote.
It was, but just the way Danny was portrayed as being completely out of the loop when
Survivor
we know he was already in the loop. Yeah,
it's called editing.
No, but this was discombobulated editing. That was the thing that got me.
Yeah.
So, all right. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about in particular?
No, I think we've covered it. So I think we can jump right in and let's do this.
Well, before we jump right in to see how Shan did in comparison to the rules, we do need to mention that these rules come in a shorter and much more colorful version in poster form.
Yes, they do.
You can go to the robhasawebsite.com/YXLost feed page. Scroll down and look, there's the poster.
There it is.
Right above the poster, there's the rules. We talked about that. So you could click on the poster and order that.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Then
lovely holiday gift, everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
And apparently, again, Australia will not allow me to mail to you, so I'm sorry.
We're still figuring that one out. In addition to the poster, we also have other ways to get the rules, so you can always have them with you. T-shirt, mug, sweatshirt form. There's the poster T-shirt.
You can hang it on your wall, you can wear it on your back, and you can drink out of it.
That's right. That's what I was going to say next. You can drink out of it, as I do. Just go around, poke around the website. There's an RHAP Black Friday sale going on right now. I think it's only going on for like one more day. So if you're listening to this as soon as it comes out, look on social media, or if you're a patron, look at your patron account. There are, some discounts there.
Jump on that.
Jump
My
on it.
mom has one of our mugs in the china cabinet. So sweet.
Nice.
Or like the fancy dishes in the house.
That's right.
Anyway,
I've always thought of myself as a fancy dish.
a fancy dish.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, that's me.
Props to my mom.
Yes. All right. Well, I predicted that with things simmering in the core alliance, they would hit a boiling point this week and Shan would be blindsided.
Oh, so here we go again. Back to David Bloomberg.
Well, yes. But exactly how
David is right.
Yeah. But exactly I have a new ringtone now. But exactly how and why did it happen right now? What were the key factors that caused most of Shan's own alliance to turn on her? After she was voted out, Shan said she felt like she played a really strong game, and indeed it seemed like she had been doing so much so right. But was that part of the problem? Did it attract too much attention? It's time to figure out why Shan lost. The first and foremost rule talks about the need to scheme and plot. I don't think there's any doubt that Shan knew the primary importance of this rule. And indeed, I selected her as the one doing the best job when we did our Why Blank Lost podcast covering the non-elimination episode. I noted that she showed she could enact plans, that Ricard hatched with her, in large part through her ability to connect with people, make them think she was completely with them, even when it seemed like it should be obvious that she said the same thing to the players she'd previously voted out.
Mm-hmm.
Going way back to the beginning of the game, your winner pick, Sarah, told Dalton Ross Shan was the one.
The worst. The worst.
She
Can't
said,
just say Sarah.
No.
Put that back in the universe. I'm sorry, Sarah. It's the butterfly effect.
Anyway. But anyway, Sarah told Dalton Ross Shan was the one person who everyone really gravitated towards because she was a smooth talker.
Mm-hmm.
A few weeks later, Jeannie told Mike Bloom Shan was pretty much everyone's number one. We saw that she convinced JD that she had his back. Same with Brad. They continued into the merge as she convinced Nasir of the same thing,
right,
with him saying that Shan and Ricard were his number one allies, and in particular, even noting that Shan lured him further in by saying she didn't trust Ricard, which made him feel even more special. Now, he didn't say that. I'm saying that. I don't want to put words in his mouth. Shan had multiple alliances. She was in the center of all of them. And she seemed similar to those people that we've discussed in the past, going all the way back to Dr. Will on Big Brother, where people knew she'd lied to others, but always thought she was truly on board with them.
Yeah, and this is where I think we run into that very interesting dynamic between she and Ricard. Because what I think happens quite a bit when people strategize in the way that Shan was strategizing is it's almost like things that happen pre-merge, you can kind of get away with because it was pre-merge. And once you all come together, it's almost like you get to start over again. It's a clean slate because not everybody comes with you to the merge, especially in her case, since she and Ricard had voted everybody out of their tribe. So the only person that knows all of her dirty laundry is Ricard. So if there is one person who can look at her strategizing and determine how she does it, it's Ricard. And so she's put herself in a very difficult situation because he knows exactly all of the promises that she made to each of those individuals as she waved at them as they got voted out. And so in his situation, he's probably looking at it going, well, she did it to all of these other people. At what point is she going to do it to me, especially since I know all about it? And if anybody can talk to the jury about what she did to people, it's Ricard. So I do think that her strategizing, incredibly impressive, but also problematic because she kept with her the one person that could put it all out there for everyone else to see or use it against her like we saw Ricard do.
Yeah. Now, I want to put it all out there, too, to go back to the beginning to point out a few things she did. First, we discussed at the time, going way back, that she was likely the one who messed up the puzzle for her tribe in the first episode. Remember that way back when?
Yeah, when Sarah got voted out. Yeah, you want to talk about that again?
Yes, because Sarah was the one who somehow took the blame. as Shan told us on the show, she was at the bottom because of the puzzle piece, but at the top because of her game. And she
Right.
predicted that she was in a good spot to keep controlling the game going forward. Good prediction there.
Mm-hmm.
One way that happened was at the time she convinced Sarah she didn't need to play her shot in the dark, which obviously she should have.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
as you know, as UA moved forward, we heard from JD in interviews that Shan was protecting Ricard, even though the others wanted him gone. Clearly, she knew how important he was to her game, at least at the time. Moving into the merge, she put herself into a great position with Danny, Deshawn, Liana, Ricard. Also, we mentioned she also had at least Nasir, and she had sub alliances with Liana and, of course, Ricard. She just set herself up so well.
Oh, she did. But it's also one of those interesting components where you develop really great relationships with people, but then you continue to cut people out of the game that would have benefited you better, I think, long term. And that's what, I think maybe we'll get into in the second rule is how that some of her decisions, while at the time might have looked like, oh, these are great game moves, in the end, I think it's what actually added to her demise.
Yeah. Now, before we get there, and I know you weren't jumping ahead.
I see. I prefaced it and said we will get there.
I know.
I'm learning.
But one place where there has been some question is how well she set herself up. Came from Steven on Know It Alls this week, because she wondered if Shan should have promised, like literally promised Ricard a final 2 deal. Like, they didn't have it officially.
Right.
And they knew they were going to have to go against each other. Steven even suggested that maybe that was why Shan lost. But no, Steven, that wasn't it. We're here to tell you. The official answer is no, that was not the reason. Rob said it probably wouldn't have mattered, and I agree. Most promises this season haven't exactly meant a whole lot. Even this week, I had to laugh when Shan was telling someone, I'm not a liar, because at least 5 people who've been sent packing may beg to differ.
Right.
And, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. This is Survivor. You should be lying. Otherwise, you're coach and just pretending not to lie.
Right.
I just found it amusing at the time. And then she said at Tribal Council, they're all liars.
Yeah.
And it goes back to my point that a promise for a final 2 between 2 smart players, it really wouldn't have meant the thing.
Well, and I think in this particular instance too, it wouldn't have helped her. It would have made it worse, I think, as far as the relationship that she and Ricard had. It was almost better to have that really, really honest moment as opposed to trying to convince him of something that Ricard knows is not true, because he knows how solid she is with the other 3 individuals in that core alliance. And so he's a smart guy. He's not going to hear this and go, oh, okay, so you're never going to cut me then. I'm definitely in final 2. He's not going to buy it. He's going to hear that, and it's only going to support his idea that Shan is totally against me. She's going to use me as long as she needs to. And now she's lying to me about a final 2 deal. So I don't think that would have benefited him or benefited her at all in relationship to him, because he would have never believed it. Never believed it.
Yeah, he might have cut her sooner. I mean, if she'd have come to him and said, you're my final 2, he'd have been like, oh, crap, she's about to vote me out.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Which is also interesting why his reaction to her telling him about the plan to vote out Ricard was so shocking, where he didn't say to her, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you looking out for me. He was immediately skeptical, like, wait a second. Yeah, why is she telling me this?
Yeah, what is going on here now?
And so that just, again, adds a layer to Ricard's game, where he was very aware of Shan and the types of things that she was doing. And how great for Shan to come to him with his ouster and say, oh my gosh, this is what's happening. They want to vote you out. It's not me, it's them. And so, for him to be skeptical, I think makes sense, because he has seen what Shan has done thus far in voting out people that are very close to her, in voting out people that she has made promises to. And so for him to look at it and go, wait a second, something's not right here, it just adds to that the problem that Shan kind of created for herself with that strategy because he was so aware of how she was playing the game.
Right, right. And I think that does take us nicely into the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Now, we had several things going on here. I'm going to save the part that we were just talking about till last, actually, because some of the problems were the fault of the whole core alliance. Some were her fault, and some were caused by other people, which got reflected back at her. So actually, I'm not saving it for last. I'm saving it for the middle. But we'll take it in reverse order, because 2 weeks ago, we talked about how Tiffany didn't violate this rule, but a couple of her allies did, which, like I said, reflected back onto her. We're in a similar situation here with one of the same people being Liana. As Rob said on Know It Alls, if Liana doesn't tell Shan about Ricard's plan, it's actually better for Liana, because then Shan wouldn't have Ricard as a tight side ally anymore, and she would need to rely more on Liana. Now, it also would, of course, have meant that Shan wouldn't have told Ricard, which therefore wouldn't have led Ricard to flip on Shan. I believe Robert Steven described the whole situation as a Greek tragedy. And I thought that was really appropriate. By trying to prevent a bad outcome, she caused a worse outcome.
Yes, exactly. And I think that goes back to what I just talked about. And you have to remember your audience. And that was the one thing that I think Shan missed out with Ricard in not fully appreciating the way that he was playing the game. He was playing the game very similar to Shan as far as figuring things out. I mean, and I think one of the things that he was worried about was, and we've talked about, who's going to get credit in the end. She was kind of the closer for a lot of the deals that they came up with, but he was with her the entire way, kind of making these determinations and bringing these things to fruition, but she was the one that could carry it through. And so to have a conversation like that with Ricard, it's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself because you're both playing the game so similarly. And that was one thing that I think she missed out on, because all of a sudden Ricard's brain kicked into overdrive and he really thought everything through.
Right. Now, I don't think that Danny and Deshawn should have told Liana to begin with. They have to know how close those two are. So why let her in on the secret plan to go after Shan's other close ally?
Right. Yeah, especially if you don't need the number, which they didn't. They had enough votes. Yeah.
Right. But then once Liana told Shan, it could be argued this is when Shan herself broke this rule by telling Ricard. But I would say that wasn't actually the case, because Shan wasn't included in the plan, so she wasn't giving away her secrets. She was passing along vital information to an ally from her point of view. The thing is that Deshawn and Danny clearly did not agree with this take, as they both voiced that Shan had betrayed them by telling Ricard. Now, this is where things get complicated, because I'm not exactly sure how she could betray them when they were the ones making a move directly or indirectly against her, and they didn't tell her about it. But I think it was a situation where there were two sides going on. They felt she picked sides, and the side she picked was not with them. There was this line in the sand, and she was like, no, I'm over here with Ricard in this line. You stay over there on that side.
Right. And that's where that core four becomes so significant, because in Danny and Deshawn's mind, that was supposed to be the solid four. Liana, same. That was going to be the four. And then by her sharing with Ricard, even though she was never willing to commit to Ricard a final two, Deshawn and Danny don't know that. They don't know that until they finally get to tribal council, when all of a sudden Ricard's like, hey, by the way, we never promised each other anything. And so in their minds, they're looking at it as, well, she's now stepping outside of our core four, and she's protecting someone who's not in our group. And because we had all this lead up where everyone was kind of questioning, having those emotional responses to, how do I want to play this game? Who do I want to vote out? And who do I want to keep around? And for what reasons do I want to keep this person around? This just kind of put them back into the, I have to play this game for myself, as opposed to play this game for the group. And I do think that that's where that struggle became even more real. But then that helped them make that decision, because once she did that, they were like, okay, it's not about this group anymore of having this alliance. Now it's an individual game.
Right. Now, before that happened, that they caused a different problem with this rule because this was the whole alliance issue when they all just decided to get up and go huddle while
Mm-hmm.
Xander and Erica were sitting right there. It was a move that showed exactly where they believed everyone stood, and generally something that's not very wise to do as an alliance.
And so open.
Yeah.
I mean, they were literally like 15 feet away from each other.
Yeah.
Not a good move.
Yeah. Now, the other potential problem that Shan had with this rule, putting aside the group thing, was that several times in tribal councils we saw her being very reactionary, such as when she decided they should vote out Heather a couple weeks ago. And JD, going back to UA, said that she played well in interviews that he gave, but freaked out easily at tribal council. Now, maybe that was strategy on her part to appear that way while enacting a plan. It's hard to say. We found out later, she really wanted Heather gone. Maybe she viewed this as her opportunity to do that, and it wasn't just a snap decision.
Right.
But the way it came off, you had Deshaun, who wants to think things through, Ricard, who likes to think things through, Shan, who apparently wanted to make quick decisions. We don't know. Maybe she already thought it through, and that's why. But that was the appearance.
Right. I'm making myself a note because you said something I want to talk about later.
Okay. Well, we can progress towards later by moving to the third rule, which tells players to be flexible. And we've already discussed how Shan had a number of different alliances and sub-alliances, which looked like they would provide very good cover for her. But we also saw how Shan was portrayed as being too bossy several times over, which, of course, is the opposite of flexibility.
Right.
Whether it was the argument with Ricard about the extra vote the first time or the second time, the Heather vote, the other issues where Deshaun felt like he was being told what to do, this idea was clearly conveyed to the audience. Shan noted on Twitter in her own defense that despite the portrayal in both specific cases where we saw her push a vote a certain way, she ended up backing down and going along with the other person. And that much is certainly true. She was a smart player, and she knew that she had to keep her allies happy. The problem seemed to be more in the way she began the conversation, not necessarily in the way she ended it, at least as far as her allies were concerned.
Yeah, because it was almost like she just was giving in. At least that was what it was appearing like. And I do think that sometimes the end result is not what people remember. It is the initial conversation where that person doesn't want to have to feel like they're convincing you to do something. They want to feel like it's a group decision, and it shouldn't be one where you're just begrudgingly going along with it because that's what they asked you to do. So I do think that she was kind of missing things a little bit at the beginning by approaching people in the way that she was, not being as open or sounding to be as open. Because I do think that something we see a lot on Survivor is kind of like who came up with the idea. And nobody wants to throw out a name, but everybody kind of wants to have credit for certain things. So if it's more of a group discussion, and if it doesn't feel that way, then people can start feeling like they're on the outs looking in as opposed to being part of the decision-making process. So I do think that Shan, even though she was the closer early on, once the game progressed even further, I think it became much more difficult for her to continue that because you had so many people that were vying for that position. They all wanted to kind of be the ones making the decision. And I do think that this is worth noting because I just had an epiphany about the Nasir versus Heather vote. I know, right? You mentioned it and I was like, wait a second. That's kind of an incredible move as far as Ricard is concerned, because if Shan has Nasir convinced that he's with her and with the group, Heather's not with the group, right? So she wanted Heather to go. She wanted to keep Nasir. Ricard probably recognized that Nasir was someone who he could not pull away from Shan. But Heather easily pulled away from Shan because they had no relationship. And so I think that that explains that Heather-Nasir vote better, because Ricard was very aware of the relationships that Shan was creating with people. And that was a relationship she kind of missed out on, was Heather, because Heather and Erica were close. And so she missed out on that, but she had Nasir. So I just kind of had that epiphany.
Yeah. I absolutely don't think that they could have convinced Nasir to go against Shan in this
Right.
if things had been different last vote.
Mhm.
And I think that's, good foresight
Right.
to see that. Now, going back to the issue of, how the other players viewed her, whatever, Shan thought about, well, I backed down, so I was, flexible. The other players didn't necessarily see it that way. Heather said
Mhm.
Shan was playing the role of telling everyone what to do. Deshaun said he wouldn't let people tell him what to do in the game. And even when they were making up, he said, I was just trying to smooth things over with Shan, but yet again, she was telling me what to do. Like, she has very little tact.
Yeah.
Ricard made a comment about having a high maintenance alliance. I took a note in episode 9 saying that Shan was getting a reputation with her allies for her way or the highway, which obviously was not great for the long term. Turned out not to be great for the short term. She even seemed to recognize it herself as she said, I don't want to seem like I'm the one calling all the shots, so I need to listen to all the opinions. But then she ended by saying, but also getting the way I want the vote to go.
Right. And she compared it to even her congregation where they might not always know what to do. So she needs to make sure that things turn out the way that she wants. And so it's a great idea to have that you've got such belief and confidence in yourself that I want people to do what I want to do because I'm right. But at the same time, this needs to feel more like a group decision. Otherwise, you are going to be labeled the person who is pushy, the one that's forcing people to go along with things, the one who is putting ideas out there and not listening to others. And that's not a good place to find yourself in Survivor.
Right. And that's a difficult tightrope to walk.
For sure.
Now, it wouldn't surprise me if this topic is one that Shan addresses in her interviews. For now, we have to go with what we've seen. And most importantly, what other players have said on the show about their view of how she was behaving.
Right. And I'm thinking now, just as we're going through this conversation, something that Tony changed about his game when he came back for Winners at War. And he talked specifically about his demeanor and how he would, when he would talk to people, he would make himself feel smaller.
Yeah, that's what I was doing there. If you're on the video, is I was making myself smaller.
Yes, he would make himself smaller and he would be more dismissive or not dismissive, a
receptive.
Little more. Yes, and demure and listening a little bit more, still getting his ideas out there, but making it appear as if they were the ones that were really making the decisions and appear less threatening by the way that he was presenting himself. All of these things become part of the psychological makeup that people have when they are determining how they're going to play this game. And if they are viewing you in this particular way, that's what they're going to think of you. And so I think it's interesting to see that Tony was like, I need to completely change that about myself. And so this was a struggle that Shan had, was just how she was presenting herself. Well, in normal everyday life, great, put yourself out there, be confident, and that you want to be the one in charge. That's lovely and wonderful. But on Survivor, it can put you in a very, very difficult spot, which we saw Shan. And unfortunately, she had a sidekick that completely took advantage of this.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think, I think Shan is, and this is not a hot take at all, that Shan is going to be back for some sort of returnee season. What she needs to do, in my opinion, and it sounds like your opinion too, is make a Tony-like adjustment, because people will have seen her this season and they'll be expecting this from her. And she's going to need to take a step back. She also needs to stop humming her song, because they'll know that by now. Yes. But yeah, the key is, I think, whatever she may think about her own flexibility, what other people thought is the important part there.
Oh yeah, perception is reality.
Yes,
100% on Survivor.
Yes. Now, one other area where Shan struggled a bit with flexibility kind of straddles the line between the third and fourth rule. So let's move into Rule 4. Which tells players not to let their emotions control them. Now, Shan had a couple issues here due to different goals tugging her in different directions, as we've discussed before we got into the rules. She wanted her alliance with Deshaun, Danny, and Liana to succeed for, as she called them, cultural reasons. She knew she'd have to go up against them at some point, but hoped it would be put off until Final Four. Deshaun similarly noted the duality of wanting to support other Black players, but also play for himself. But Shan had the added stressor, and again, we've already talked about this some, of also making great connections beyond that group. Probably specifically talking about Ricard and saying at least twice in this episode that she knew she'd have to go against him, but not yet.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about how all of these things are important on a personal level. But when it comes to winning Survivor, if that's your goal, sometimes you have to block all of that out and just focus on yourself.
Yeah, and that's where I think Survivor is so fascinating because it is about relationships. And Shan recognized that wholeheartedly coming into it, that this is a game about relationships. And she knew that she needed to focus on those relationships. But again, you have to have that decision making process and what are you going to focus on and what becomes significant to you. Because if you are going to go down that path and if it becomes more of an emotional decision for you, then you are going to lose sight of the game. And I do think that her conversation with Ricard was an emotional one. It was one where she had formed a bond with him, she had formed a relationship, but there is the struggle because I've made promises and assurances to these three individuals over here. I haven't made those promises to him, but I'm so close to him and I love this guy and he's my best friend out here and we're having all of these connections, but he's not part of this group over here. And so it really becomes a hard moment. And I think we saw the struggle with Shan when she had that conversation, because I think you've already talked about it. If she hadn't, we might not be having this conversation right now if
Right.
she had never gone to Ricard.
Right. Now, earlier in the game, she was able to keep these emotional bonds separate. We already talked about how she made everyone feel like they were her number one, and then she cut them.
Yeah.
She even said JD had become like a little brother to her, and she didn't want to vote him out, but she did it anyway because she knew it was the right game move. I think it was in Rob's podcast with Jamal, which was great, by the way. But I think they were talking about how it just wore her down. She was able to do it early on, but as things progressed, it became more and more difficult for her.
Oh, for sure. When it comes to Survivor, if there's one thing that becomes the most difficult is that emotional and psychological toll that it takes on you. Physically, you can adjust and you can adjust without food, the lack of sleep. Like there are certain things that your body kind of acclimates to. But when it comes to just the emotional component of it, your brain never turning off and constantly having to spin and think about where the game is at, what's happening, how am I affecting this person over here? It's so draining. And I think Shan was the person who was doing the most of that out there because she had so many conflicting relationships. She was part of this core four. And I think for the most part, that core four, she was the one that was struggling more than they were. I think Danny and Deshawn had talked about things a little bit, but they were pretty solid. Liana was kind of following along Shan. Shan had taken on almost like that mother role to that group where like, I'm the one that's kind of, I'm bringing us all together. And I'm the one that's going to be leading us into this final four, which is probably why she feels so hurt by Deshawn because Deshawn went against that. And so, I do think that she ended up finding herself in a very emotional place because of the relationships she had made with people. And it's just, it's a true struggle when you are out there, when you are looking at who have I formed bonds with. And at some point I'm going to have to turn my back on this person. And when you make such a strong promise to a group, like we had seen on this episode, we've seen throughout this, when they all came together, that like this was a cultural component. This is something that we are choosing to do because we want to be together in the end. That becomes even more emotional. And so I do think that this was a huge struggle for her. And unfortunately, game and this type of emotion just didn't fit.
Right. All right. Well, we can move to the fifth rule, which is all about the social game and reminds players they need to pretend to be nice. Shan certainly made great use of scheming and plotting. We already talked about that. But a lot of that was based on her ability to get people to trust her, which we've also discussed a little bit. She said at one point, my game is social. I need to make people feel like their opinions matter. Clearly, she succeeded. Going back to Ua, Jeannie told Mike Bloom, she's really great at connecting with people. She shared something with me very early on about her childhood. That made me really feel for her. She got me there. There were also moments not caught on camera, little small moments like her putting her head on my shoulder. She wasn't like that with anybody else. I took these little personal cues to think, this is someone I feel truly safe with. Why would she vote me out? Brad told Mike Bloom, Shan has an amazing ability to know every person's emotional needs. She could touch you on an emotional level. She touched each one of us. She touched me on a very spiritual, emotional level that hit very deep. Now, was Shan pretending to be nice in these cases or truly connecting with them, but then realizing, as she did with JD, and we've already discussed, that she still needed to cut them? I don't know which it was. Either way, bravo.
Yes. I mean, she went into this game actually saying in one of her pregame interviews that this is a game of relationships, understanding people, understanding relationships. And she really did strive to do that. But I think that this is also what kind of came back and bit her, right? Because if you are someone who is so good at making yourself seem true to someone and forming that bond, it hurts a little bit more when that person does something to you. And so I do think that this was another level of the struggle that we saw with Shan. Was she was forming relationships that were very close with people, and then she was having to cut them, or she was having to make a decision as to whether or not she wants to play with them. And so I do think that it became harder for her as the game moved along, because once we got to the merge and here's Ricard and people are talking about voting him out, and now this is a struggle that she's dealing with. So she was great at forming relationships with people. Absolutely 100%. Great social game. But then there's that added component of how does it then reflect upon her game when you're willing to hurt people when you've created such a close bond with them.
Right.
And I think that that's, we're not going to see it because she's not going to be in the final three. But I do think that that would have been an issue that people would have struggled with voting for her, because I felt like you and I were so close and I felt like we had this special bond, and then you voted me out. It takes on a little bit more of a personal feel.
Yeah. And I think even going back to, I mean, like, this is pre-jury, and like you said, it doesn't matter. But even going back to JD, he was like, yeah, I'm not going to be getting together with her for drinks anytime soon.
Right. Exactly. It
ouch.
Feels more personal.
Right. All right, moving to the sixth rule, it warns against being too much of a threat. Now, I don't think anyone believed that Shan was a threat at all, right?
Oh, no.
We could just skip through this.
Certainly. Right? This is why she was voted out when she was, because she wasn't a threat. No, we need to talk about it.
Yes. Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that let's just look at where it happened, right? People didn't want her to continue to have the momentum that she's had, right? Ricard recognized this. He saw it from the jump with Ua and how she had this momentum building. She wanted to vote people out. She was creating relationships with these people, and she still voted them out. And the trajectory for her in this game was, I'm making it to the final three because not only do I have some people over here on the side, I have a core four over here, which Ricard is not a part of. And so I think all of these things together, she had positioned herself in such an incredible space, because right now we're down. Now we have 7, right? We have 7 people left playing. This is when the numbers really matter. How are you going to be able to swing the vote your way when you know that there's 4 people together? Well, how do you do that? You have to have 4 on the other side that are willing to vote against someone from the core 4 in order to make it happen. And Ricard recognized that. And so I think that this was the moment to take out the biggest threat, because the numbers, you actually had them in your favor, which we saw happen. So I think that overall, I mean, Shan was a huge threat. If she had continued, if she passed, made it past this vote and kept going, she was in an incredible position to be there in the final 3.
Yeah. I mean, let's count the number of people who thought Shan was a threat. Erica said, right now, Shan is the biggest threat to win. Deshaun told Erica that Shan added yet another move with the Nasir vote on top of everything else, and also told us, I'm smart enough to know she can win. Ricard looked at the numbers and said that when Shan decides to get rid of him with her 4 people, he's gone. Even her tightest ally, Liana, noted that the reason Deshaun and Danny wanted to target Ricard was to distinguish themselves from her because she made all the big moves. I feel like everybody there was looking at Shan the way we were looking at Shan from our side of the TV screen, that she was the likely winner if they didn't get rid of her soon.
Yeah.
I do want to say, and I don't know where I ended up putting this in my notes, but I have to wonder what would have happened if Ricard had not won immunity, because I think that what might have happened is Shan would have won.
Oh,
the game.
Yeah. Well, and that's why this moment is so key. And this is why I have to give so much credit to Ricard for recognizing the significance of this particular vote. And I think a lot of people who play this game miss this moment. They don't realize that this is a make or break moment right here. Like, this is going to decide the end result of this game. Ricard did that. I mean, Ricard said, I've decided that today is the day for Shan to go.
At which point, literally, I'm sitting here watching with my wife and son, and I literally said out loud, whoa.
Yes.
Even though I had predicted it, even though David was right and said this was the time to do it,
yes,
I still out loud expressed shock that it was actually happening.
That he was recognizing where they were at in this game. And this is when all of those bottom players become so significant, because those are votes. You know that Xander has an extra vote. You start doing the math and computing things and putting it all together. And okay, even if we can't get Danny and Deshaun, at least I've got Xander and an extra vote. So it's still possible. Like, we could get there. Like, that's where the math becomes so significant. And so this was such a key vote. And the minute that she told Ricard he was the target, I think is what really got his brain spinning.
His brain was processing.
Yes, because now he's recognizing they're talking about me. And if they're talking about me, Shan's telling me, but Shan's with them. That's 4 people. I'm going home. Like, I will not be here. If I survive one more vote, I'm not going to be here on the next vote because the numbers are gone. I don't have a chance. And so I really do think that is what caused him to start doing the math and really caused him to start looking at it. And if he didn't know that, and obviously he won immunity, so we don't see how the vote would have played out. But then, I mean, it's probably Erica, because that's who was the planned vote would have been Erica.
Right.
And again, then your numbers are dwindling, and then you still have 4, and it's 4 against 3, even though Xander has an extra vote. So it's really significant. And the timing of this was impeccable, because yes, I agree. We would have a whole different end game if Ricard hadn't won immunity. We'd have much different discussion for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can move to the 7th rule, which covers idols and advantages, including how to handle and deal with them. And when it comes to working around them and obtaining them herself, Shan did a great job. She got both her idol and extra vote through some very nice pieces of deception. The extra vote, of course, came from JD when she told him he needed to give it to her to show loyalty. And the idol she got after Jeannie dutifully told her and Ricard about it. They agreed nobody would open and claim it. And then, of course, Shan went back and did exactly that.
That was amazing. That was great, Survivor. And the fact, Jeannie, I'm sorry, but don't ever. That's a bad idea. You can't trust people that much that you're all just going to leave something alone that has so much power. But the way that they played it was great, because it still appeared as if nobody had taken it, when in actuality they had. So that was an incredible moment to watch, as much as I can't stand the way that they're putting the idols out into the universe this season. At least they came up with a creative mechanism by which to get it without having Jeannie know that they did, and then furthering it by still saying the broccoli thing, by making Jeannie think that they still didn't have it, but they were just going to find out if the other tribe had it at that point. So all around, just genius moves. Yeah.
Now, last week we debated at length, very length, whether Shan made the right move in using her extra vote. And we don't need to go over that again, even though most people said that David was right. But, especially since it was...
Really? I don't think so. Come on, Twitter followers. Give me some support.
They already told me.
No,
they just didn't want to. They didn't want to make you upset.
No,
so they sent me private
you're
messages.
so full of it.
No, I'm not actually, but it's moot. It's moot. It doesn't matter.
No, you just don't want us to revisit it because I was right.
No. Anyway.
Now David can't
Oh,
speak.
dying. Sorry.
He's dying because I made him laugh.
Yes. Of course, now we're faced with the question of whether she should have used her idol this week. That's the important question, not last week's question. Early in the episode, Shan was worried that Deshaun and Erica might pull a blindside on her. But I guess that didn't carry through enough after multiple conversations with Deshaun because she didn't play the idol. I just have to think that once Ricard won immunity and they all seemingly settled on the Erica plan, she felt like things had calmed down. This was almost certainly helped by Ricard, Deshaun, and Danny doing a very good job of reassuring her, not giving her any cause to, get nervous. And of course, that's why they call it a blindside.
And they did actually do what I didn't think they could do, because we have seen so many people telling on everybody throughout the whole season. Keeping secrets this season has been difficult. And early on in the episode, everybody was sharing with everybody what was happening. And I was like, what is going on? Like nobody could stop telling each other what was going to be happening. And so it was interesting to then see that they all kind of buttoned up and said, okay, no one's going to say anything about this. So yes, Danny and Deshaun and Ricard all did very well in maintaining this, but they really did it to their own benefit, right? I mean, it makes sense that nobody told Shan, because Shan was the biggest threat and Shan was going to win the game. And I think they all had that realization that it's now or never. And if we don't do it, then we're all going to be in trouble. And so I do think that they all recognize the power of that idol as well. I mean, Erica talked about it as it's like giving a baby a machine gun, which was a little extreme, but makes sense, that if she plays it, then somebody else can end up going home. So they were recognizing it. And so I think that was an added layer to this, is making her feel very comfortable. It's all very calm. This will be an easy vote. And then she won't play it. She goes home with the idol and done and done. And so, yes, I do think that overall they all did a great job in making her feel fine. And so there was a reason she didn't play it. She had no reason to think she needed to.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, Appendix A is next, and that's about the tribe keeping their end goals in mind when voting. And we've already, talked about that a lot. We talk about voting out the weak, then the strong, then the weak, then the strong. We're kind of in a mixed part of the game right now. In theory, the core alliance should be voting out the weak or those who aren't in their alliance, like Heather, Erica, and Xander. But there's still this fight for dominance among those within the core alliance.
Right.
So those players, as we've discussed, need the outsiders to use as their soldiers. Now, it may well end up that most or all of the core members get shot in the crossfire that's coming up, which would take us back to why I generally say get rid of all those outside the alliance first. It'll be interesting to see how it all turns out. And then we can come back to this and say, okay, if they hadn't done this, then this group would have marched to the end. But now that march has been stalled, and I don't think that Danny, Deshaun, Liana, and Ricard are just going to go back to being all pals.
No.
And so it's going to become a Wild West shootout, and they're all going to be babies with machine guns.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I mean, this is one of those interesting moments in Survivor where, because everyone is kind of vying for that spot, and it's something that as a viewer we watch and say, why isn't anybody getting this person out? Why is no one focusing on this person? Why is no one voting this person? Well, this is why, because then the ripple effect that it has is who is going to be the next one to step up and who is going to become the next target. Because when you keep those threats around, well, then people aren't looking at you, they're looking at this other person. But you obviously need to get this threat out because you want to be in that person's spot and you want to win. So I'm very intrigued. I'm very interested to see how this group recovers from this. And I think now you've got Liana, who's going to be very upset by what happened. And will she be someone who then gloms on to that other group and says, you know what, forget these guys because they left me out in the cold. I'm going to join up with you. It'll be very interesting to see how this all comes together.
Yeah, I mean, so often we see that when one person gets another person in their sights and they just are dedicated to getting them out, what often happens, one goes, then the other goes right after. Is
Mm-hmm.
that going to happen? Well, we'll have to wait till predictions to figure that
Oh,
part out.
those damn predictions.
Yes. Um, all right. Well, before then, we can move to Appendix B, which talks about the jury phase of the game. And once again, I don't really think it came into play here, other than, of course, wanting to get out a key competitor. From Ricard's point of view, especially, much better to have Shan on the jury than against him in front of the jury, even if they could have made it to that far
Mm-hmm.
without her voting him out first.
Right.
So,
I agree.
all right. Well, in that case, it's about time to wrap things up. So, Jessica, what are your final thoughts?
I love that we have a song that we can dedicate to a Survivor player. I don't think we've ever had this before. And I do think that Shan came into this game. I mean, she called herself a mafia pastor before she even started the game. And I was very intrigued to see how someone who called themselves a mafia pastor
And
was
she
going
had a
to play
machine
this
gun.
game.
She was a
And she
mafia
ended up with a
pastor
machine gun.
Right?
Right?
It's all
Because
connected.
far too often when we see individuals walk into the game with such a concept of themselves and an idea of themselves as to how they want to play this game, it ends up backfiring because you don't know what you're going to get once you actually come to the actual game of Survivor. Who's going to be here? Who are you playing with? Are you going to be able to get along with these people? So your outside plans don't necessarily carry into the game because the game shifts and changes. I do think that we saw Shan take the plan that she had walking into Survivor and she executed it. She did become a mafia pastor. She was forming those relationships and forming those bonds, making people feel incredibly special to her and then cutting them. And it was incredible to watch and to see how is she going to maintain this moving forward? How is she going to keep playing the game at such a speed and at such a level when people are going to be playing the game with her that see her doing this? And I think that brings us back to Ricard. Ricard saw everything that she was doing and was very cognizant of the effect that it was going to have on his game. And so while Shan was very good at creating relationships, it was almost like she was too good at it. She was too good at it because she created such a tight bond with Ricard that it ended up kind of taking down her game because she shared with Ricard and she decided to talk to Ricard about his game and what was happening, that he became the target. And once that happened, he shifted and she became the target. And so this is that inner struggle that so many survivors have. At what point do you put someone else's needs before your own? And this is where that pastor component, I think, of her comes in, where she had created a relationship with Ricard, wanted to be true to that relationship, but was struggling with wanting to play the game. And so unfortunately for Shan, she found herself living her actual life on the island where she was having that inner turmoil, that struggle that so many people have throughout life. Who do I want to play with? Who do I want to have in my life? Who do I want to have significant and important to me? But unfortunately, she's doing it in a game for $1 million. And so I think overall, Shan's game really was on point. She was on an incredible trajectory. She made incredible bonds, created alliances that were very strong. But that one problem for her was those relationships were so significant to her and she was so good at creating them, it ultimately caused her downfall.
Yeah, Shan and Ricard absolutely crushed the early part of the game as a power duo. Then they managed to come into the merge against a tribe of 4 and a tribe of 6 and still retain a power position, while Shan made tight alliances with 3 members of Love You and 1 member of Yase, helping to blow up Yase in the process. Shan had many of the parts of the game absolutely locked in. She was amazing socially, making so many people think she was their number one. She worked incredibly well strategically, often in concert with that social portion. But it also seemed like she was used to getting her way, and that put some strains on things. I don't think those particular issues were what caused the flip against her, though. Instead, 2 key things happened. First was that so many of the other players saw what many of the viewers saw. If she stayed in the game, she was a legitimate threat to win it all pretty easily. She just had too many successes under her belt and could also charm the jury. The second was that her loyalties were divided. Ricard worried that she could use Danny, Deshawn, and Liana to vote him out at any time. Danny and Deshawn, meanwhile, were upset that she revealed the plan to Ricard. Whether it was her fault, Liana's fault for telling her, Danny and Deshawn's fault for telling Liana, it didn't matter. What mattered was that in their minds, Shan broke their trust and drew a line in the sand. On top of those things, this really was the perfect time to target Shan. That's why I predicted it last week, that we've discussed it several times here. They needed to have allies like Heather and Erica and Xander. They probably could have done with one less if Ricard had been certain that both Deshawn and Danny were going to be on board, and if Deshawn and Danny had known that Ricard would be. But nobody figured that out until the dominoes started falling. And the opportunity was there at this very moment, because as Danny told Erica and Heather, Shan did something to anger him that day. Wait another day or two, maybe he's over it. It almost had to be now. In an alternate universe where Ricard didn't win immunity, I mentioned before, I wonder if Shan wins the game. If she made it past this point, she truly might have been almost unstoppable. But all the factors we discussed came into play. Shan was too big a threat and lost trust with too many of her close allies, and that is why Shan lost.
Very good.
All right. Well, before we get to our next predictions, yes, let me remind everyone that the rules we just discussed are available in poster form, and t-shirt form, and sweatshirt form, and mug form. You name it.
So many forms.
So many forms. Just go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed. All right. Now, once again, it's time for predictions.
Hate this part.
Well, obviously, I love it, at least for right this
Well,
moment.
okay, this week
see.
you do.
Yeah,
I'm
this
sorry,
week
when
I
did
do.
your winner pick go home? Should we remind everybody about that?
After yours.
Yeah, but still.
Yeah, it
very
doesn't
early.
matter.
I'm
After
sorry.
yours. That's the key.
I love you, David Voce, but I have to throw that back out there every once in a while.
Yeah, and I like Sarah, who went first.
A second, technically.
Okay, sorry. First episode.
Anyway.
All right. Anyway, is there any chance that I make one that's as surprisingly good as last week? Probably not. But I'm still going to give it a shot. One thing that's key to me in making my pick is the moment when Ricard told Deshawn how Shan revealed Deshawn's plan to target Ricard. Deshawn denied it. Ricard said he knew he was lying, but added that he needed Deshawn now and Deshawn could go tomorrow. To me, that was like the line in the original Total Recall movie when the doctor tries to talk Arnold Schwarzenegger's character into leaving the simulation and lays out like the rest of the plot of the movie for him. Of course, as you're watching, you don't know that, but if you watched it a couple times, you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what happened.
That's what happened.
I believe the producers did the same thing here, telling us what will happen next week. Similarly, Rob and Steven, they discussed if the move would be for Ricard to turn on Deshawn next week, and both said yes. So I guess it won't be as surprising if I'm right, since others are saying the same thing. But it just makes sense for Ricard to take out the person who was actually gunning for him.
Oh, for sure.
You know, now, I have to mention that Jeff brought up a twist in the previews, and a couple people on Twitter have told me that they think the twist has been leaked, spoiled in terms of what it is, not in terms of how it happens, but what it is.
Right.
I have avoided finding out and being spoiled about it myself. But the general
You have?
Yes.
Oh, I haven't.
I know. Someone on Twitter told me that you were like, oh my God, that's terrible.
It's horrifying.
Yes. So that's the consensus, is that it's absolutely terrible. One person said it is second only to Edge of Extinction on how bad it is.
Yeah.
And
I have not put it into the Twitter universe on my page. I've learned about it. I hate it. I hope to God it's not correct.
Yes.
If it is, there will be mutiny in the streets. It's horrifying.
Okay.
Horrifying.
Well, I hope everybody is wrong, or that it fails miserably. And we can just go back to what we discussed earlier regarding how Jeff can't seem to learn anything when it comes to twists. I mean, literally, how can you follow this episode which had no twists and was amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and then go into let's throw another twist in there.
Right.
You know, but I can't make a prediction based on a twist I don't know. So I'm just going to stick to what I said and go with what I was talking about earlier. When two people take aim at one another, it often goes boom, boom. In this case, that would be Shan to Sean.
Yeah. See, and here's the problem. I know what the twist is. At least from what I've been told.
Right.
So I really can't make a prediction because so I'm just going to go along with you because I do think it makes sense because here's the thing. I think Ricard is so like on point with everything that is happening in this game. His ability to kind of compute like outcomes and where things are at. He has a much different persona about him on camera than we see like from Danny. Danny is very kind of even keel, like calm, like, oh, well, this is what makes sense. And that's what we're seeing from Danny. Whereas Ricard is like, I gotta know over here. I have to think about that and this. And so it's a much different gameplay. And then you have Deshaun in the middle because Deshaun wants to play that great social game. He also wants to be strategizing, but he's kind of in between Danny and Ricard. And then also you have the outliers. You've got Erica and Heather that are coming together, that are voting the same, that are very close. And Xander, who everybody seems to have forgotten about, which I think is amazing that this guy is still kicking with an idol and an extra vote. What the hell is happening? I mean, like, but this is what happens when you have like a majority decide that now we're going to look inwards instead of outwards. Right. And so I agree. I mean, I think it makes sense that now you've lost your footing because you voted out one of your core four. You aren't going to have any place to go because now you have given power over to those that were once at the bottom.
Right.
And now they are going to rise to the top.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of Xander, last week I made some predictions about the end of the game, and I want to update those now. As a reminder, I said Xander and Erica were certain to be at the final three, and Heather's edit could be perfect for a 0-vote finalist. But at the same time, I noted that Ricard and Deshaun put themselves into good spots. After what we saw this week, I'm going to update that. I no longer think Heather will make final three. Maybe she'll go out in final four fire making, maybe sooner. Maybe this horrid twist we're talking about will knock her out. But now I think that the final three, two of the spots will still be Xander and Erica. I think Ricard moves up from being in a good spot to being in the best spot.
Absolutely.
I am now making him my winner pick. The fact that we're seeing Ricard explain how things were his moves makes me think he makes it to final three. And if it's him against Xander and Erica, I think he could almost sweep the votes. Mark it down. Let's hope that I didn't reverse butterfly effect curse him by saying this.
Mark it down. Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we?
Yeah. Now, I am also willing to back off of my thought that Erica makes final three because the reason I've been saying that is that we saw so many people saying she's schemy, and we hadn't seen any of it. It's possible they were saying that to lead up to what we have seen in the past couple episodes so that we knew who she was when she was trying to make some of these moves.
Well, but I do think that Erica is almost the exact opposite of what we saw with Shan. If she is sneaky, as people are describing, so she's doing what Shan couldn't do. Shan couldn't be sneaky. Shan had to be more out in the open with what was happening because she was the one that was creating those relationships, coming up with the ideas, being the closer as to who was going to be voted out. So someone like Erica becomes very scary because if she is as sneaky as everyone is saying, you don't know what she's going to do, which I think makes her very intriguing. Someone like Shan, you have a much better idea because you know who she's aligned with and you know who she's close with and you kind of can see how her game is being played. Erica is that wild card where everyone's kind of like, I don't know what's happening. And I don't know if they're editing it that way on purpose. So we're kind of left out in the dark, but she definitely seems to be a focus, and she's someone whose name is constantly coming up. And the fact that in one scene when Liana is being asked, like, who's the most threatening person or the one that's going to win or something along those lines, she takes off Shan first and Erica second.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I do think that there is something about Erica that we might just not be seeing.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out the RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com/patron. We've talked about, we're at the end of November, so you probably just want to wait till December 1, and then you'll get the last few Survivor 41 Q&A shows, Patron 5 for 5 and more. There'll be more patron trivia. And when Rob isn't talking directly to everyone, there are the Facebook groups and Discord to keep you occupied with a great community of people, including both of us. You can support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron, or click on the link at our robhasawebsite.com/yxlost feed page. Once you get to the Facebook groups, make sure to say hello.
Yes, and you should also say hello to us on Twitter. I am at Jessica Lewis 89. He is at David Bloomberg. And you should follow us both so you can get both sides of the story. You can see both of the tweets that go out, live tweeting, I will say, during the actual episodes themselves. We also tweet throughout the week. So you should definitely follow us both, because sometimes David likes to cheat and steal my tweets. So that way you can find out that that's happening.
Not ever true.
And when people want to say I'm right and he's wrong, you'll see that on Twitter too.
That's why we've never seen that on Twitter.
Stop it. God. So
and of course, to make sure, you should use the hashtag for the podcast, which is YXLost.
Mm-hmm.
Also, everyone should immediately run out and follow me on TikTok, where I'm at David_Bloomberg. We've talked about my videos before. I've done some already on some of the topics we discussed here, like all the lying that went on. Have one planned for Jeff's comments in tribal council.
He's preparing everyone. Yeah, get ready.
How he doesn't seem to understand the game, things like that. Even talked about how rule number 2 applies outside the game in the real world on one of them. So, and I may have mentioned one where, about my prediction. So it's possible that I had a TikTok on that, but yeah. So again, David_Bloomberg for TikTok. And I usually post on Instagram a day later, david.e.bloomberg there. Very important also, make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP Survivor podcasts by going to, again, our YXLost feed. You'll find great content, in the Survivor feed or in the general Rob Has a Podcast feed, or the know-it-alls in the Survivor feed, and the RH and the reality TV Wrap-Ups feed where we are. You'll get the B&B, Taryn Armstrong Stockwatch, Shannon Gus's International. And on the Wrap-Ups feed in particular, you have to listen to Bryce Isaiah's Purple Pants podcast. Bryce is, of course, hysterical and discusses so many fun things, including this season of Survivor with Wendell and Jack Atkins from The Circle. He covers HBO's Insecure with Sharia Lloyd from Survivor China. He gives you the casual tea with Aman Edwin, covering pop culture in a way that's like no other, and each week naming a new freak of the week. Now, Jessica, you may not know this, but at one time, Bryce called me the freakiest freak when he was encouraging me to dance at a karaoke bar in Boston.
Oh, I love this. I do love this.
But he wasn't doing the podcast yet, so I guess I wasn't in the running for freak of the week.
Well, listen, if you have not enjoyed Bryce on his podcast, you definitely need to start. I've had a few interactions with him, and I won't go into detail as to what they included, but holy shit, funny.
Oh, okay. I was like,
And just an incredible, human being, incredible energy, so much fun, and someone that you should definitely take full advantage of listening to anything he puts out on his podcast, because it is really entertaining. Very, very, just a great guy all around, an incredible human being, individual. So yes, you should definitely listen.
Yes. All right. Well, before we go, before you send us out here. I want to wish a happy Hanukkah to everyone who celebrates.
Oh, yes.
It's very early this year, so I hope you've all done your Hanukkah shopping.
Yes, happy Hanukkah. And if you haven't, you can go buy like a t-shirt or a poster from, I don't know, some website we might have talked about, right? So thank you so much to Scott St. Pierre for all of the editing that he does do on this podcast, but also our HAP in general. We really appreciate all of the hard work that you do, Scott. Thank you so much. Thank you to Will from America for the incredible theme song that you have created for David and I. It is very catchy and very enjoyable, and people should hum that tune in addition to the Shantham. So it's just an idea, something to throw out there in the should definitely hum our song. And thank you, David, for another fun, incredibly intuitive, thought-provoking episode where you constantly remind us that you are right and the rest of us are wrong. So thanks for that. I think that should be our next t-shirt. David, you're right. I should just put that into the universe.
That's right.
I own one.
You're
Maybe other people should.
You're certainly not going to get any disagreement from me on that one.
So, yes, thank you so much. And thank you to all of the listeners for sitting through an hour and a half with us. We truly appreciate you supporting us. And I love hearing back feedback, not only like on the YouTube comments, but just on Twitter, people looking forward to listening. So thank you for all of the support. We truly appreciate it.
All right. And thank you, Jessica, of course, for another great podcast. We will see everyone right back here in a week. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.